Hello, everyone, and welcome to Literary Tales. I'm your host, Paul Krause, and in this episode, we're exploring the pessimistic view of politics and political philosophy in the dramas of William Shakespeare. William Shakespeare, that immortal bard from Stratford-upon-Avon, is well regarded as the English-speaking world's greatest dramatist and, I would argue, the greatest dramatist in the history of all drama. But Shakespeare was more than a literary writer. He was also a political thinker. In fact, political commentary pours through the lines of his many plays, and we have indeed already examined in one episode on Shakespeare how he contrasts the political pursuit of power leading to death, destruction, and war, and it is juxtaposed by the salvific power of love and family. But then you have some of his other great tragedies, which are his most political works, as we all know: Hamlet, Julius Caesar, Antony and Cleopatra, Othello, Macbeth, and King Lear. For the sake of brevity in this lecture, I will limit my exposition on the pessimistic politics as tragedy to Hamlet, Julius Caesar, and Antony and Cleopatra. The reason for this is because Hamlet is standalone and deeply relevant to our world today, and it's also one of the most famous, if not the most famous, of all Shakespeare's plays. Julius Caesar and Antony and Cleopatra, by contrast, though they can be read as standalone dramas, should be read as companion pieces, which continue to develop the mature themes of politics, power, and love, beginning with Julius Caesar and reaching its tragic fruition in Antony and Cleopatra. Reading Hamlet politically should immediately reveal the politics of paranoia that run throughout the play. The play opens with two inconsequential sentinels, Bernardo and Francisco, before giving way to the more important characters, Horatio and Marcellus. Something strange has been occurring, and Horatio has arrived to investigate the strange phenomena. Horatio's entry into the play, which pushes the play forward, is brought forth by whispers of rumors, conspiracy, although in this instance, the rumors turn out to be mostly true. But the dramatic beginning of the play foreshadows the reality of cold and dark whispers and shadows that drive the play forward. When the men encounter the ghost, Horatio demands it to speak, all to no avail. The ghost exits. The men immediately consider the worst possibility for interpreting this phenomenal encounter. Horatio foreshadows the ominous nature of the play after the ghost vanishes, when he says, "In what particular thought to work I know not, but in the gross and scope of mine opinion, this bodes some strange eruption to our state." This is followed by that most famous line, "Something is rotten in the state of Denmark." The strange eruption to our state and the rotting problem in the state is what the rest of Hamlet deals with. King Hamlet, as we know, has recently died, and the ghost is his apparition. King Claudius, aptly named after the corrupt Roman emperor, has made his bid to the throne in murdering his brother and subsequently marrying Gertrude, thereby ascending to the throne through murder, through deceit, through a lack of trust. We become aware, through the ghost of King Hamlet, that Claudius murdered him because of his lust for Gertrude and lust to wield crown and scepter. Claudius's marriage to Gertrude is not out of love, but out of his pure pursuit of power and self-pleasure. And of course, as is common in Shakespeare's drama, the pursuit of power and self-pleasure always leads to death, destruction, even murder. Lurking in the background, of course, is also the feud between Denmark and Norway over land, which is boiling up to erupt in war. Compounded to these fears are the worries of Polonius, that the young Prince Hamlet is madly in love with his daughter, Ophelia. Ophelia informs her father of Hamlet's suggestive behavior and love letters. Polonius offers to prove his loyalty to Claudius by spying on Hamlet, thus serving both Claudius and his own end to prevent Hamlet's love for Ophelia. Thus we are also introduced to the police state that is occurring within Denmark, and there was a historical analogy going on in Shakespeare's own time. The police state of Elizabeth I. And this, of course, is deeply relevant to those of us living in the 21st century because of the security surveillance state that we all live under, even though we like to pretend that it doesn't exist and that it will only be used against bad guys. But it is Claudius's fear, his paranoia that Hamlet will take revenge for his father's murder by killing him, that drives his antagonism toward the young prince to rid himself of the perpetual threat at his side. Polonius is but a pawn in a larger and more sinister game of the politics of paranoia. Shakespeare does a remarkable job in presenting politics as no pasture for saints. It is the domain of those dreary and sad souls, those humans inflicted with the primal eldest curse, a reference to Cain's murder of Abel. Love is absent in the political scheming and skullduggery that consumes the state of Denmark. The rot inside of Denmark is because of the pure pursuit of power, political scheming and skullduggery, which chases away love from all society. So paranoid is Claudius that he effectively establishes a police and surveillance state to control every aspect of life in the palace. Polonius, through fidelity to Claudius and fear of Hamlet's love for Ophelia, is enlisted, as mentioned, as a spy, even though he is ultimately but a pawn. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, two childhood friends of Hamlet, are also conscripted in this game of spies as they betray their friendship and memories with Hamlet in service to Claudius. They, too, are but pawns in this game of political scheming and paranoia. Not even the sacredness of friendship and joyful memories that friendship bring can keep relationships from dissolving into utilitarian contracts of political paranoia and spying. Claudius, for instance, doesn't care at all about Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. He also doesn't care much about Polonius. Claudius merely contracts them for his service, for his own selfish ends. What happens to them is ultimately unimportant to Claudius, so long as his scheme to dispatch Hamlet and protect his power succeeds. I should also point out here that as the second act comes to a close, Hamlet is also engaged in counter-spying on Claudius, and he is very much bound up in this game of spies, as all the villains of the play are. Hamlet, however, is not without suffering the degradation of the rotten sins of the Danish state and the brutal machinations of power politics inside the prison that is Denmark under Claudius. En route to England, Hamlet grows suspicious of his former friends and rewrites the letter instructing the executioner to kill the two disposable spies, and in a battle against pirates, he manages to flee back to Denmark, leaving Rosencrantz and Guildenstern for dead. And die they do. But rather than offer any hand of forgiveness or redemption to his former friends, Hamlet abandons them to the fated contract they had signed up for. We may feel Hamlet justified here in his actions toward Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, but in his rather callous actions, though of course lesser in comparison to Claudius, we come to see how truly changed Hamlet has become due to his enslavement to the politics of power and revenge, paranoia, and the pursuit of power, which is the rot in the state of Denmark. Ironically, the security surveillance state that has been erected to keep Claudius in power fails. The realm of the political, if it is to survive, must shed itself of the spying apparatus that constricts it. Thus, Polonius is killed by Hamlet, though Hamlet thought he was killing Claudius in the spur of the moment. As hitherto mentioned, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are also shed off and later die. In the end, the very elaborate system of security and spying that Claudius had built does him no good. His crime is eventually revealed, and he pays the price. At the same time as Shakespearean irony reveals the limits of the security surveillance state, the tragic element of the play is seen in the deaths of Ophelia and Hamlet. Ophelia loved Hamlet. Hamlet loved Ophelia. Whatever possible love the two had for each other could not be consummated because love is driven away by the madness and the rot of politics. Ophelia, in my opinion, shared with so many great Shakespearean scholars, committed suicide rather than having drowned in her own madness. That is neither here nor there, considering the bleaker portrait that Shakespeare is painting. Hamlet, for his part, probably did love Ophelia, despite the debates that are somewhat asinine in Shakespearean scholarship over whether he did or he didn't. We could simply take Shakespeare's clear declarations of love from the mouth of Hamlet. I loved Ophelia. 40,000 brothers could not, with all their quantity of love, make up my sum. Hamlet's declaration that he really did love Ophelia helps us understand the greater tragedy of both of their deaths and the pessimism and the terrible horror of the security surveillance state that Claudius had erected. In happier and more tranquil days, Ophelia would have been queen to Hamlet, and the two would have gaily spent their days together. However, it is not Hamlet's destiny to be wed and live the happy life of love. He must deliver the state from the constrictive and enslaving machine that Claudius has built. As such, Hamlet is fated to a tragic, loveless life as well. For that is what Shakespeare is revealing about the empty and brutal nature of politics for us. Politics forsakes love, because politics is ultimately about power, and power cannot be reconciled to the reality of love. But Shakespeare is no anarchist either. The state must survive and be restored in some functioning fashion. While those who occupy its halls of power will be miserable creatures without love, the state plays an important role in facilitating the happy and loving lives that the rest of its citizens can create for themselves. As such, Hamlet is the tragic hero whose destiny it is to restore the state to its proper condition by destroying the intrusive security surveillance state which prohibited civil society and human-to-human interactions and relationships from flourishing. The security surveillance state erected by Claudius destroys the possibility of love, destroys the possibility of friendship, destroys the possibility of marriage, as we see in the crumbling relationships between Hamlet and his friends, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, and the inability of Hamlet and Ophelia to marry one another in love. It has also been widely argued that Shakespeare was making an esoteric commentary on the Elizabethan police state in his day. So, Hamlet ultimately destroys this wicked and terrible state, and so Hamlet ultimately dies. Hamlet dies at the end of the play because he must. The political life, as we've said, chases away love, and therefore cannot give life, but only serve to protect life. There is a difference between giving life and protecting life. Giving life is all about love. Protecting life is all about duty. Politics is a tragic enterprise according to Shakespeare. It is, however, a necessary one. and that is why it is ultimately tragic, and one should not take a high view of politics, politics as messianic, politics as salvific. Politics is purely pessimistic. Politics chasing away love and destroying love altogether is further explored in Shakespeare's two great plays, dealing with that most sublime imperium and political machine in Western history, Rome. Julius Caesar and Antony and Cleopatra, in many ways, explore similar territory to Hamlet. Like Hamlet, these two Roman plays are deeply political, and it is because of their political nature that they find themselves in the annals of Shakespeare's tragedies. Where Hamlet was a sympathetic character, Julius Caesar, Antony, and Cleopatra are filled with an overabundant vanity. Julius Caesar is clearly in love with himself, his grandiosity, and his power. Antony and Cleopatra, when they are introduced in the first scene of their play, enter as king and queen of the world. They enter the stage with servants, a golden train, and eunuchs fanning Cleopatra as if reminiscent of a Roman triumph. The pomp and circumstance of Julius Caesar, Antony, and Cleopatra are born on the stage for all to see, quite literally. Part of the crisis of politics is the conflictual dimension of it. Brutus, Cassius, and the senatorial Republicans who oppose Caesar are fighting a losing battle against the politics of monopoly. The politics of monopoly, universalism, is represented by Caesar, who wields the unruly passion of the mob for his self-gain. Moreover, since Julius Caesar has now entered the domain of the political, his relationship with his friend Brutus changes, and once again we see Shakespeare exploring the dimension of friendship within politics and how politics ultimately destroys friendship. Prior to Julius Caesar's foray into politics, he counted Brutus as one of his best and most trustworthy and beloved friends. Brutus was able to be a true friend to Julius Caesar because he did not threaten the politics of power that the Senate held and embodied. With Julius Caesar now entering the domain of politics, the relationship between the two men must change, and change it does, for the worst. Brutus is convinced by the conniving machinations of Cassius to slay his former friend. Thus, this is the source of the great shock and sadness on Caesar's face when he is mercilessly cut down like Priam. It is in seeing the one man whom he trusted so dearly deliver the culling blow. The ghost of Caesar haunts Brutus and Cassius and the rest of the conspirators for the play. The moral law rears its horrifying and terrifying head against the men who, in betraying trust, Dante placed in the ninth and lowest circle of hell. What was anticipated as their triumph becomes the whip of their flight. Brutus, Cassius, and the rest of the pro-Republican forces thought that the murder of Caesar would stave off the rule of one and preserve the rule of many. It did not. The energy unleashed in the murder only speeds up the inevitable eradication of the politics of plurality into the politics of universalism that will eventually be consummated by Octavius. Antony and Cleopatra continues where Julius Caesar left off. The triple pillar of the world, the triumvirate, still retains a vestige of the politics of plurality. Octavius, Antony, and Lepidus have split the Roman Republic among themselves. Sextus Pompeius, or just Pompey in the play, is a fourth leg in a three-legged, which will become two-legged race. Pompey controls the sea, and therefore prevents Octavius, Antony, and Lepidus from getting at each other's throat. Ironically, and again irony is a major feature in Shakespeare, this unintended fourth leg acts as the wall of peace between the triumvir. Antony, however, is caught between a rock and a hard place. His erotic love for Cleopatra puts him outside of the domain of the political, despite being among the three great Roman leaders. For a man of extreme pride and haughtiness, he nevertheless speaks the only wisdom in the play. Let Rome and Tiber melt, and the wide arch of the ranged empire fall. Here is my space. Kingdoms are clay, our dungy earth alike feeds beast as man. The nobleness of life is to do thus, when such a mutual pair and such a twain can do it, in which I bind on pain and punishment the world to wheat. We stand up peerless. This most passionate and wise aside by Antony continues to develop Antony as a man of passion, as a man of love. After all, in Julius Caesar, Antony was the most passionate man after the death of Caesar. The one line that everybody knows from Julius Caesar was uttered by Antony. "Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears." The passion exuded by Antony in Julius Caesar has now fully consumed him in Antony and Cleopatra. Love threatens the political. Read those wise words from Antony again. Hear them again. Let Rome and Tiber melt, and the wide arch of the ranged empire fall. Love has its own domain. Here is my space. Antony also reflects on the temporality of politics, but the eternality of love. Kingdoms are clay, our dungy earth alike feeds beast as man. Those who wish to build immortal houses and eternal arches in politics are doomed to failure. Politicians are not lovers, thus lovers are not peers with politicians. We stand up peerless. Antony and Cleopatra are peerless because they are lovers. And we remember Antony and Cleopatra not as political schemers and rulers, but we remember them primarily as lovers. Lovers in one another's arms, whose love was chased out of the world by the dastardly deeds of politics. Where Antony and Cleopatra are introduced as passionate and prideful individuals, Octavius Caesar is introduced as a cold and calculating man of bureaucratic management who only talks politics. In the fourth scene of the first act, as Octavius is introduced, he is described as having no grand entrance and gives no passionate and memorable speech. He is no Antony, he is no Cleopatra. Instead, Octavius enters, along with the other Roman contenders for the prize of managerial power, in a dry and sterile room of banal politicking. Rome, as Shakespeare reveals in the scenes in Rome and among the Romans, is the center of the passionless, loveless world of cold and calculative politics. It's all about the pursuit of power. Antony doesn't escape this reality when in the presence of his fellow Romans in Rome. His marriage to Octavia is purely political. There is nothing loving, erotic, or passionate about it. At first opportunity, with hostilities erupting, he sends Octavia back to Octavius to be rid of her. The war for the world begins when Pompey is eliminated. Again, this unintentional fourth leg initially kept the peace between Octavius and Lepidus allied together to destroy Pompey. Power, however, kept Pompey short-sighted. He despised Antony and cursed him in the opening of the second act. He called Antony and Cleopatra Epicurean cooks, a derogatory dig at their sensuality in each other's arms and bed. The politics of power blinded Pompey to his own impending doom. It did the same to Antony, insofar that an alliance with Pompey would have proved beneficial in the coming struggle against Octavius. But the blinding power of politics, the pursuit of vanity, leads men to their own demise. Lepidus may have been the third man in the triumvirate, but he too is of little concern. Of course, this is the result of the fact of history. Octavius uses Lepidus to defeat Pompey, then has him imprisoned after his use is no longer valuable. This is made tragic, given that Lepidus, according to some of the Romans, loved Caesar. "Oh, how he loves Caesar," one of the Roman lieutenants said. Agrippa, a cold politico like his master, retorts, "Nay, but how he clearly adores Mark Antony." Love, as we've mentioned, cannot survive in the realm of cutthroat politics. Loyal Lepidus was disposable, and disposed he was, once his utility for the pursuit of power ran out. The removal of Pompey and Lepidus cuts the world down into halves, one ruled by Octavius and the other by Antony and Cleopatra. The diarchy cannot survive the inevitable push to political universalism either. And there is also the diarchy between power and love cannot survive the pursuit of political universalism as well. So at the mouth of Actium, the battle for the fate of the world commences. It is not a battle between Octavius and Antony. It is a battle between cold rationalism and bureaucratic managerialism, embodied and represented by Octavius, against the world of passion, love, and the erotic, embodied and represented by Antony and Cleopatra. They represent and embody nature's infinite book of secrecy, love. In this battle, the cold and calculative politics of Octavius ultimately wins when Antony, love-struck and seeing Cleopatra flee to the open seas, gives chase after her like a dotting mallard after his beloved, abandoning men and material to be with the warmth of Cleopatra. The world of Antony and Cleopatra is one of sensual play and erotic catharsis. Give me some music, moody food, of us that trade in love, Cleopatra famously says in the second act. She follows this up by revealing the extent of her world of sport with Antony as she reminisces. That time, oh times, I laughed him out of patience, and that night I laughed into patience. And next morn, ere the 9th hour, I drunk him to his bed, then put my tires and mantles on him, whilst I wore his sword. With all lost, the only comfort that Antony and Cleopatra have is in retreating to that space of play. Where hast thou been, my heart? Dost thou hear, lady? If from the field I shall return once more to kiss these lips, I will appear in blood. I and my sword will earn our chronicle. There's hope in it yet. Come, Antony continues to say, after his disastrous defeat at Actium, let's have one other gaudy night. Call to me all my sad captains. Fill our bowls once more. Let's mock the midnight bell. And of course, that midnight bell is death. As Antony and Cleopatra are defeated in politics and retreat into their bedchambers of love for another night of gaudy sex, thereby mocking that midnight bell of death wrought by the inevitable ascent of politics, Shakespeare again shows us how politics all but chases away and destroys love. The crime of Antony and Cleopatra was that they were lovers in a world of politics, and love cannot exist in the world of politics. Being lovers in the cold world of politics, they had to die to make safe passage for the consummation of the universal bureaucratic imperium that rational politics demands, which had chosen Rome and Octavius as its vessel of realization. Love cannot coexist with political power because love threatens the political. Let Rome and Tiber melt, as Antony said. To love is to forsake the political. To love is to let Rome and its great empire in the Tiber River melt away in fires that consume Troy, that consumes every political kingdom. To love is to allow the pettiness of politics and power slip away and allows individuals to dwell in the timelessness of memorial love, just as Cleopatra did when waiting for Antony's return from Rome. I might sleep out this great gap of time while my Antony is away. When campaigning in Egypt to finish off Antony and Cleopatra, Octavius coldly says, "The time of universal peace draws near." Universal peace that end of history pursuit that even we in the 21st century are enslaved to, can only be consummated with love destroyed. So it is that Eros, Antony's most trustworthy companion, his greatest lieutenant, dies. Then Antony dies, and eventually Cleopatra dies, all in rapid succession. Shakespeare is not, in my view, celebrating universal peace through universal order. Instead, he is revealing the pessimistic and tragic reality of the cold rationalism of politics. The inevitable law of politics is that it must destroy plurality in favor of universality to win that universal peace. And in doing so, nature's infinite book of secrecy, the book of love, must be destroyed, and all personality that dwells in that world of love must be eliminated. The triumph of Caesar and the bringing of universal peace entails the ultimate triumph of cold, bureaucratic politics, the very bureaucratic politics embodied by Octavius in the play as he sits over desks, reads papers, and commands his lackeys to execute his will. Indeed, how very tragic. Reading Shakespeare is a great joy. He is, above all, a treasure of Englishdom and the English language. The great dramatist that he was also, as we can see, a first-rate political thinker that gives us much to consider. His tragedies, as demonstrated, are all political works. That they are tragedies also reveals Shakespeare's pessimistic outlook on politics. Politics is tragedy. Politics is sad. But politics sometimes is a tragic necessity. But it comes with a cost, namely the forsaking of love. Shakespeare's reflections on the need to dismantle the security surveillance state as it is seen in Hamlet is very much worth our consideration today, especially in this brave new century we find ourselves. Likewise, Shakespeare's consistent presentation of the conflict between politics and love is something we must necessarily wrestle with. Is it the case, as with Claudius and Octavius, that the consummation of the political is the dictation and the control of the life of the masses at every little level? It surely seems this way, especially in rhetoric and reality. Does politics chase away love? And must love necessarily be fated to dissolution for those who become consumed by the coldness of politics? Long before Max Weber insisted that politics is no realm for the saint, Shakespeare also reveals that politics is no realm for the saint, the lover, or the idealist. Some 300 years before that great German philosopher and sociologist made that famous declaration, we already see it in the plays of Shakespeare. Politics beats us down, it spies, it schemes, it lies, it kills, it destroys friendships. Those who claim to enter politics because they are interested in love and helping others should be regarded with the utmost suspicion. That is the enduring political wisdom of Shakespeare. Those who love and would dwell in the space of timeless play, which is love, should remain out of the brutal domain of politics. Otherwise your life will be a tragedy, as the coldness of politics consumes you. Or we can lay down the pursuit of power, as Prospero did, and allow love to take its rightful place, protected and sanctified by the political. That is what Hamlet ultimately achieves through his tragic death. When we do that, like Prospero, we walk off into an uncertain future and ask the world, the audience, for forgiveness, because forgiveness is the path to restored love. Yet when we walk off into that uncertain future, we might just find something far more beautiful and meaningful when the fog clears and the breath of nature's infinite book of secrecy is opened up before our eyes and our hearts.